Good morning, National Wood Flooring Association. It's great to be alive, yes? Welcome to my hometown, Nashville. Thanks for coming. As you probably surmised by now, I don't play country music. But nonetheless, living in Nashville for quite some time now and having several music industry-related businesses, I've gained an appreciation for country music that I never had back when I lived in Los Angeles. But from time to time, I do hear some pretty strange country songs written by sometimes some pretty strange country songwriters. Songs like, I'm so miserable without you, it's like having you here. Or my wife ran off with my best friend, and I sure do miss him. Not too long ago, I spoke for 1,200 policemen. They seemed to like this one. If I'd shot you when I wanted to, I'd be out by now. In December 1972, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 was at 2,000 feet on final approach into Miami. Now, as you probably know, one of the next to the last steps before touching down is lowering the landing gear. But when the nose gear indicator light failed to illuminate, confirming that the landing gear was down and locked, the flight engineer left the cockpit, headed down into the avionics bay beneath to check on things. Meanwhile, the pilot and the co-pilot began fiddling with the indicator light, trying to see if it was fully plugged in or if they could somehow fix it. And because everyone was focused on the quick fix of a light bulb, no one was actually flying the plane as it slowly, gradually descended. An altitude warning chime sounded in the cockpit, but both the pilot and the co-pilot seemed to ignore it, apparently frustrated that they couldn't get the indicator light to work. Finally, the co-pilot realized that something was wrong. Co-pilot, we did something to the altitude. Pilot, what's that? Co-pilot, we're still at 2,000 feet, right? The pilot's reply and last words were, hey, what's happening here? Seconds later, the plane crashed into the Everglades, killing 101 people. The National Transportation Investigation Board noted that the cause of the crash was due to the entire flight crew being preoccupied with a burned out landing gear indicator light. It was the second deadliest crash in US history. Too often, too many business leaders allow themselves to get distracted away from mission critical functions and end up focusing on trivial problems. In other words, in many businesses today, no one's flying the plane. Well, for the next hour, we're going to focus on 3 mission-critical functions. The first one, adapting to change. And number 2, achieving intense customer loyalty. And number 3, creating a culture of passion. Remember, nothing will light your organization on fire like an enthusiastic staff. So let's talk about critical mission number 1, adapting to change. Remember that song by Bob Dylan? You better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are a-changin'. Wouldn't you agree that he hit the nail on the head with those lyrics? 40 years ago, when he was creating albums like Blonde on Blonde and Highway 61 Revisited, America was experiencing this explosion of change and creativity with drugs, sex, rock and roll, the raging war in Vietnam. But all those changes in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even the 90s pale in comparison to what we're contending with now. Now, constant change is the new normal. But the good news is, those who best adapt to these ongoing changes are the ones who will win the biggest. The truth is, we're afraid of uncertainty. We're afraid of stepping into unknown territory because it requires that we view things differently. I mean, what if our plans don't work out? What if our ideas get rejected? Adapting to change really boils down to your ability to problem solve. And your first step is to reconnect with who you were before the stumbling blocks of life begin taking their toll. If you encounter a tough setback or a difficult challenge, just reach down and tap into that creative energy that you had when you were a child. That's how you'll begin finding ways to step outside convention and discover unexpected solutions to the challenges you face. Now imagine for a moment that you're wearing bifocals. Because with bifocals, it allows you to shift your vision back and forth. One moment, looking at the big picture, the 30,000-foot view of the world, and the next moment, zooming in on the smallest attention to detail. This is a paradox that every creative leader faces. I mean, think about it. You must be able to think short-term and long-term simultaneously. You must be able to squeeze every drop out of every resource, and yet at the same time, you must be able to think outside the box and dream big. And you must question everything. Simultaneously, you must walk around with a relentless attitude of positivity, and you must practice humility and admit mistakes. Simultaneously, you must take charge, assert authority, and be willing to go against the grain. Navigating through all these paradoxes and complexities really boils down to your ability to creatively innovate and problem solve. In fact, through my love of guitar playing, I've even learned lessons on perseverance. And I've come to the conclusion that becoming an excellent guitar player really boils down to 3 things. Practice, practice, practice. Reminds me of this story of this man lost in Manhattan. And so he goes up to this old Chinese woman with long gray hair behind the vegetable stand. She's got these little wire-rimmed glasses on, and he says, "Ma'am, how do I get to Carnegie Hall?" She just looks up at him and she says, "Practice, practice, practice." So don't just hear this stuff. You've got to live it right here, right now. You've got to practice until your leadership fingers start to bleed. The more time you spend practicing powerful habits of effective leadership, getting outstanding results will simply become second nature, just like playing the guitar has become second nature for me. Now, as we roll this next DVD, I want you to just imagine for a second some of the things you can do in your organization, in your company, to accelerate your productivity. Imagine what you can do to increase sales. Imagine what you can do to create a culture of passion and enthusiasm. Just imagine the possibilities. Thank you. So let's talk about mission critical function number 2.